Hello, hello, and welcome to Chapter 7, Part 2 of 2, Daring Greatly by none other than Brené Brown. I'm so happy and grateful that you are here, that we're here connected, and we're going to invest the next 20 to 25 minutes to complete this chapter and grow together, understanding shame, understanding resilience, understanding vulnerability on a whole other level based on backed up research and interviews that Brené Brown took the time out to really capture for us all. And so I'm super excited. This is the chapter on wholehearted parenting, daring to be the adults we want our children to be. And this is part 2. So let's dive right into it. My name is Vanessa Black, and I'm so happy and grateful that you are here. If you are new to this channel, let me know in the comments, say hello. And we read 2 books every single month here. We've been reading one on personal freedom, which is this one this month, and one on financial freedom every single month, because our mission is to impact billions of souls all over the world to achieve both personal and financial freedom in their lives. And we do that by developing our minds, our bodies, and our souls daily, continuing to grow, continue to be even greater leaders in our worlds, and making that ripple effect to impact others. So definitely pumped up and excited. We're finishing up this book here, and it's been an incredible journey, incredible book, incredible wisdom and information and knowledge that has been shared. So would love to know your thoughts. If you've been reading along, congratulations for continuing to show up, to listen in, taking some time out of your days to just listen in and receive this knowledge. All right, you never know. It could be one sentence, one paragraph, one chapter that just completely impacts your life. So let's dive right into it. All right, chapter 7, part 2 of 2 of this particular chapter. We are on page 229, Minding the Gap. Supporting our children means supporting each other. If you have the physical book, it is on the bottom of 229. So you can open up and listen in at the same time. Definitely a great way to take all the information in. All right. I believe it's important at this point to pause to recognize the shaming nature of parenting values debates. When you listen to conversations or read books and blogs about controversial and or divisive issues in parenting, like how and where women labor, circumcision, vaccination, co-sleeping, feeding, etc., what you hear is shame and what you see is hurt. Deep hurt. You see people, mostly mothers, engaging in the exact same behaviors that I earlier defined as shaming. Name calling, put downs, and bullying. Name calling, put downs, and bullying. Here's what I've come to believe about these behaviors. You can't claim to care about the welfare of children if you're shaming other parents for the choices they're making. Those are mutually exclusive behaviors and create a huge values gap. Yes, most of us, myself included, have strong opinions on every one of those topics, but if we really care about the broader welfare of children, our job is to make choices that are aligned with our values and support other parents who are doing the same. Our job is also to tend to our own worthiness. When we feel good about the choices we're making, and we're engaging with the world from a place of worthiness rather than scarcity, we feel no need to judge and attack. That is a really great sentence there. Really great sentence, really, really great sentence. I'm going to repeat it again. You can write it down, take it in. When we feel good about the choices that we're making, and when we're engaging with the world from a place of worthiness rather than scarcity, we feel no need to judge and attack. It's easy to put up a straw man in this argument and say, so we're just supposed to ignore parents who are abusing their children? Fact. That someone is making different choices from us doesn't in itself constitute abuse. If there's real abuse happening, by all means, call the police. If not, we shouldn't call it abuse. As a social worker who spent a year interning at Child Protective Services, I have little tolerance for debates that casually use the terms abuse or neglect to scare or belittle parents who are simply doing things that we judge as wrong, different, or bad. In fact, I've sworn off the good bad parenting dichotomy simply because on any given day you could file me under both good parent and bad parent, depending on your perspective and how things are going for me. I just don't see what value this judgmental frame adds to our lives or to the larger parenting conversation. In fact, it's a shame storm waiting to happen. To me, the question of parenting values is about engagement. Are we paying attention, thinking through our choices, open to learning and being wrong? Curious and willing to ask questions? What I've learned from my work is that there are a million ways out in the world to be a wonderful, engaged parent, and some of them are going to be bump up against what I personally think about parenting. For example, Steve and I are very strict about what we let the kids watch on TV, especially when it comes to violence. We think about it, talk about it, and make the best decisions we can. On the other hand, we've got friends who let their children watch movies and shows that we don't allow Ellen or Charlie to watch. But you know what? They also think about it, talk about it, and make the best decisions they can. They just come to a different conclusion than we did, and I respect that. We recently found ourselves on the other side of this issue when some good friends expressed surprise that we let Ellen read The Hunger Games. Again, those parents were also engaged in the question, and the conversation we had showed mutual respect and empathy. Minding the gap can be particularly challenging when honoring difference is one of our aspirational values. I think the key is remembering that when other parents make different choices than we're making, it's not necessarily criticism. Daring greatly means finding our own path and respecting what the search looks like for other folks. Daring greatly means finding our own path and respecting that search, what that search looks like for other folks. Can I get an amen? Minding the gap and belonging. Worthiness is about love and belonging. And one of the best ways to show our children that our love for them is unconditional is to make sure they know they belong in our families. I know that sounds strange, but it's a very powerful and at times heart-wrenching issue for children. On page 145, I define belonging as an innate human desire to be part of something larger than us. One of the biggest surprises in this research was learning that fitting in and belonging are not the same thing. In fact, fitting in is one of the greatest barriers to belonging. Fitting in is about assessing a situation and becoming who you need to be in order to be accepted. Belonging, on the other hand, doesn't require us to change who we are. It requires us to be who we are. When I asked a large group of eighth graders to break into small teams and come up with the differences between fitting in and belonging, their answers floored me. Belonging is being somewhere where you want to be, and they want you. Fitting in is being somewhere where you really want to be, but they don't care one way or the other. Belonging is being accepted for you. Fitting in is being accepted for being like everyone else. And then I get to be me if I belong. I have to like you to fit in. They nailed the definition. It doesn't matter where in the country I ask this question or what type of school I'm visiting. Middle school, high school, students understand how this works. They also talk openly about the heartache of not feeling a sense of belonging at home. That first time I asked the eighth graders to come up with the definitions, one student wrote, "Not belonging at school is really hard, but it's nothing compared to what it feels like when you don't belong at home." When I asked the students what that meant, they used these examples. Not living up to your parents' expectations, not being as cool or popular as your parents want you to be, not being as smart as your parents, not being good at the same things your parents were good at, your parents being embarrassed because you don't have enough friends or you're not an athlete or a cheerleader, your parents not liking who you are and what you like to do, when your parents don't pay attention to your life. If we want to cultivate worthiness in our children, we need to make sure they know that they belong and their belonging is unconditional. What makes that such a challenge is that most of us struggle to feel a sense of belonging, to know that we're a part of something, not despite our vulnerabilities, but because of them. We can't give our children what we don't have, which means we have to work to cultivate a sense of belonging alongside our children. Here's an example of how we can grow together and how our children are capable of great empathy. There is nothing that inspires that deep sense of belonging like shared empathy. When Ellen was in fourth grade, she came home from school one day and burst into tears as soon as we shut the front door, then ran up to her room. I immediately followed, then knelt down in front of her and asked her what's wrong. Through her sniffles, she said, "I'm so tired of being the other. I'm sick of it." I didn't understand, so I asked her to explain what she meant by the other. We play soccer every day at recess. Two popular kids are the captains and they pick the teams. The first captain says, "I'll take Susie, John, Pete, Robin, and Jake." And the second captain says, "I'll take Andrew, Steve, Katie, and Sue, and we could split the others." Every single day I'm one of the others. I never get to be named. My heart sank. She was sitting on the edge of her bed with her head in her hands. I was so concerned when I followed her into the room that I hadn't even flipped on the light. I couldn't stand the vulnerability of seeing her sitting in the dark crying, so I walked over to the light switch. It was divine intervention. The act of starting to turn on the lights to alleviate my discomfort made me think of my favorite quote about darkness and compassion from Pema Chodron, who writes, quote, "Compassion is not a relationship between the healer and the wounded. It's a relationship between equals. Only when we know our own darkness well can we be present with the darkness of others." Compassion becomes real when we recognize our shared humanity. I left the light switch alone and walked back to sit with Ellen in the literal and emotional dark. I put my arm around her shoulder and said, "I know what it's like to be the other." She wiped her nose on the back of her hand and said, "No, you don't. You're really popular." I explained that I really do know what it feels like. I told her, "When I feel like the other, I get angry and hurt, and I mostly feel small and lonely. I don't need to be popular, but I want people to recognize me and treat me like I matter, like I belong." She couldn't believe it. "You do know. That's exactly how I feel." We snuggled on her bed and she told me about her recess experiences, and I told her about some of my experiences in school when otherness is both powerful and painful. About 2 weeks later, we were both at home when the mail arrived. I ran to the door with great anticipation. I was scheduled to speak at a star-studded event, and I was dying to see the publicity poster. It seems weird now, but I was so excited at the idea of seeing my photo next to the pictures of the movie stars. I sat down on the couch with the poster, I unrolled it, and I started scanning like a madwoman. Just as I was doing this, Ellen walked in and said, "Cool, is that your poster? Let me see it." As she walked over the couch, she could tell my mood had changed from anticipation to disappointment. "What's wrong, Mom?" I pointed to the line on the poster under the celebrity photo that said, "and others." I patted the couch and she sat down next to me. I held the poster open and she traced the pictures with her finger. "I don't see you. Where are you?" I pointed to a line on the poster under the um, celebrity photo that said, "and others." Ellen leaned back against the sofa cushions, put her head on my shoulder, and said, "Oh, Mom, I think you're the others. I'm sorry." I didn't reply right away. I was feeling small both because there was no picture and for caring that there was no picture. Ellen leaned forward, looked at me, and said, "I know what that feels like. When I'm the other, I feel hurt and small and lonely. We all want to matter and belong." It turned out to be one of the best moments of my life. We may not always have a sense of belonging on the recess playground or at a big fancy conference, but in the moment we knew that we belonged where it mattered the most, at home, parenting perfection is not the goal. In fact, the best gifts, the best teaching moments happen in those imperfect moments when we allow children to help us mind the gap. Here's a powerful story about cultivating shame resilience and minding the gap from Susan, a woman I interviewed a couple of years ago. Susan was busy talking to a group of mothers at her kids' school while her kids were standing close by, waiting for her to take them home. The mothers were discussing who would host the Welcome Kinder Kids party for the new students. They all hated the thought of doing it, but the one woman who volunteered to throw the party had a filthy house. After talking about this woman and her house for a few minutes, they agreed that letting her host the party would reflect poorly on them and the PTO. When they finished their discussion, Susan loaded up the kids, a daughter in kinder and two sons, one in first grade and another in third grade, and started home. Susan's first grade son randomly called out from the back seat, "I think you're a great mom." Susan smiled and said, "Well, thank you." A few minutes after they walked into the house, the same child came up to her with big tears in his eyes. He looked at Susan and said, "Do you feel bad about yourself? Are you okay?" Susan said she was completely taken by surprise. She knelt down and said, "No, why? What's wrong?" Her son replied, "You always say that when people get together and talk bad about someone just because they're different, it means they might feel bad about themselves. You said that when we feel good about who we are, we don't say mean things about other people." Susan immediately recognized a warm wash of shame. She knew that her son had overheard the conversation at school. This is the moment, the wholehearted parenting moment. Can we tolerate the vulnerability long enough to be with it for a minute? Or do we need to discharge the shame and discomfort by redirecting our child or blaming them for crossing a line? Can we take this opportunity to acknowledge how wonderfully he practiced empathy? Can we make mistakes and make amends? If we want our kids to own and be honest about their experience, can we own ours? Susan looked at her son and said, "Thank you so much for checking on me and asking me how I feel. I feel okay, but I think I made a mistake. I need a little time to think about all of this. You're right about one thing. I was saying hurtful things." After Susan pulled herself together, she sat down with her son and they talked. They discussed how easy it is to get caught up in a group situation where everyone is talking about someone. Susan was honest and admitted that she sometimes struggles with, quote, what people think. She said her son leaned into her and whispered, "Me too." They promised to keep talking to each other about their experience. Engagement means investing time and energy. It means sitting down with our children and understanding their worlds, their interests, and their stories. Engaged parents can be found on both sides of all of the controversial parenting debates. They come from different values, traditions, and cultures. What they share in common is practicing the values. What they seem to share is a philosophy of, quote, "I am not perfect and I'm not always right, but I'm here, open, paying attention, loving you, and fully engaged." There is no question that engagement requires sacrifice, but that's what we signed up for when we decided to become parents. Most of us have so many competing demands on our time that it's easy to think, I can't sacrifice 3 hours to sit down and review my son's Facebook page or sit with my daughter while she explains every detail of the fourth grade science fair scandal. I struggle with that too, but Jimmy Grace, a priest from our Episcopal church, recently gave a sermon about the nature of sacrifice, and it totally shifted how I think about parenting. He explained that in its original Latin word form, sacrifice means to make sacred or to make holy. I wholeheartedly believe that when we are fully engaged in parenting, regardless of how imperfect, vulnerable, and messy it is, we are creating something sacred. The Courage to be Vulnerable, page 238. Cheers! Get your coffee, get your tea, get your water. We just had some special delivery. Thank you, my love. Thank you, Isabel, if you're watching this. Special delivery to the door, Starbucks. Let me know What's your favorite Starbucks? Or what's your favorite coffee? And let's continue to complete this chapter. Good stuff. All right. The courage to be vulnerable. Before writing this section, I spread my data all over a dining room table and asked myself this question. What do parents experience as the most vulnerable and bravest thing that they do in their efforts to raise wholehearted children? I thought it would take days to figure it out, but as I looked over the field notes, the answer was obvious. Letting their children struggle and experience adversity. As I travel across the country, there seems to be growing concern on the part of parents and teachers that children are not learning how to handle adversity or disappointment because we're always rescuing and protecting them. That's good. As I travel across the country, there seems to be growing concern on the part of parents and teachers that children are not learning how to handle adversity or disappointment because we're always rescuing and protecting them. What's interesting is that more often than not, I hear this concern from the same parents who are chronically intervening, rescuing, and protecting. It's not that our children can't stand the vulnerability of handling their own situations. It's that we can't stand the uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure, even when we know it's the right thing to do. I used to struggle with letting go and allowing my children to find their own way. But something that I learned that the research dramatically changed my perspective, and I no longer see rescuing and intervening as unhelpful. I now think about it as dangerous. Don't get me wrong, I still struggle and I still step in when I shouldn't, but I now think twice before I let my discomfort dictate my behaviors. Here's why. Hope is a function of struggle. If we want our children to develop high levels of hopefulness, we have to let them struggle. And let me tell you, next to love and belonging, I'm not sure I want anything more from my kids than a deep sense of hopefulness. Experience with adversity, tenacity, and grit emerged in my research as an important quality of wholeheartedness. I was so grateful to see it because it was one of the few qualities of wholeheartedness that I had at the time. Remember in the introduction, I was 2 for 10. When I went into the literature to search for a concept that had all of these elements, I found C.R. Snyder's research on hope. I was shocked. First, I thought hope was a warm, fuzzy emotion, the feeling of possibility. Second, I was looking for something that I had thought of as being scrappy and nicknamed Plan B. These folks could turn to Plan B when Plan A fell apart. As it turns out, I was wrong about hope and right about Scrappy and Plan B. According to Snyder, who dedicated his career to studying this topic, hope isn't an emotion. It's a way of thinking or a cognitive process. Emotions play a supporting role, but hope is really a thought process made up of what Snyder calls a trilogy of goals, pathways, and agency. In very simple terms, hope happens when we have the ability to set realistic goals. I know where I want to go, parentheses. There's more. We are able to figure out how to achieve those goals, including the ability to stay flexible and develop alternative routes. I know how to get there. I'm persistent and I can tolerate disappointment and try again. And lastly, we believe in ourselves. I can do this. Those are great. So hope is a combination of setting goals, having the tenacity and perseverance to pursue them, and believing in our own abilities. Hope is Plan B. With my highlighter. Good stuff. Hope. Hope, hope, hope. So hope is plan B. Let me read that again. If you're taking notes, this is great. Hope is a combination of setting goals, having the tenacity and perseverance to pursue them, and believing in our own abilities. Hope is plan B. And here's the part that inspired me to deal with my own vulnerability so I could step back and let my children learn how to figure some things out on their own. Hope is learned. According to Snyder, children most often learn hope from their parents. To learn hopefulness, children need to relate relationships that are characterized by boundaries, consistency, and support. Hope is learned. Key thing. Hope is learned. And children most often learn hope from their parents. To learn hopefulness, children need relationships that are characterized by boundaries. So boundaries, consistency, and support. Children with high levels of hopefulness have experience with adversity. They have been given the opportunity to struggle, and in doing that, they learn how to believe in themselves. Raising children who are hopeful and who have the courage to be vulnerable means stepping back and letting them experience disappointment, deal with conflict, learn how to assert themselves, and have the opportunity to fail. If we're always following our children into the arena, hushing the critics, and assuring their victory, they'll never learn that they have the ability to dare greatly on their own. One of my best lessons on this comes from an experience that I had with Ellen. It began when I was still 10 cars away from her in the swim team pickup line. It was getting dark, so I could only make out her silhouette, but that was enough. I could tell something was wrong by the way she was standing. She flung herself into the front seat, and before I could ask her about practice, she was in tears. What happened? What's wrong? Are you okay? She stared out the window, drew a deep breath as she wiped her tears in the sleeve of her hoodie, and said, I have to swim the 100 breaststroke at the meet on Saturday. I knew this was really a bad thing in her world, so I tried not to seem relieved, which I was because in a crazy but normal for me fashion, I was already thinking something really horrible had happened. You don't understand. I can't swim breaststroke. I'm terrible. You don't get it. I begged him not to put me in that event. I was getting ready to respond with something pathetic and encouraging as I pulled into the driveway, but then she looked at me right in the eyes, put her hand on top of my hand, and said, Mom, please, please help me. I'm still going to be swimming when the other girls are getting out of the pool and the next heat is getting on the blocks. I'm really that slow. I couldn't swallow. I couldn't think clearly. All of a sudden, I'm 10 years old and I'm on the blocks getting ready to swim for the Memorial Northwest Marlins. My dad is a starter and he's giving me the win or die look. I'm in the lane closest to the wall, the slow lane. It's going to be a disaster. Moments earlier, as I was sitting on the ready bench, I'm contemplating making a run for my banana seat bike leaning against the fence by the diving boards. I overheard the coach say, let's just swim her up in age group. I'm not sure she can finish the race, but it will be interesting. Mom, 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 are you listening to me? Will you help me? Will you talk to the coach and see if he'll put me in another race? The vulnerability felt unbearable and I wanted to scream. Yes, you don't have to swim any event that you don't want to swim ever. But I didn't. Calm was one of my new wholehearted practices. So I took a deep breath, counted to 5, and said, let me talk to your dad. After the kids went to bed, Steve and I spent an hour debating the issue and finally agreed that she would have to take it up with her coach. If he wanted her to swim that race, she needed to swim it. As right as the decision felt, I hated every minute of it, and I tried everything from picking a fight with Steve to blaming the coach to venting my fear and discharging the vulnerability. Ellen was upset when we told her this, and even more upset when she came home from practice and told us that her coach thought it was important for her to get an official time for the event. She folded her arms on the table, put her head down, and cried. At one point, she lifted up her head and said, I could just scratch the event. A lot of people miss their heats. A part of me thought perfect, but then she said, I won't win. I'm not even good enough to get second or third place. Everyone is going to be watching. This was an opportunity to move the levers, to redefine what's important to her. To make our family culture more influential than the swim meet, her friends, and the ultra competitive sports culture that is rampant in our community. I looked at her and said, you can scratch that event. I'd probably consider that option too. But what if your goal for that race isn't to win, or even to get out of the water at the same time as the other girls? What if your goal is to show up and get wet? She looked at me as if I was crazy. Just show up and get in the water? I explained that I had spent many years never trying anything that I wasn't already good at doing, and how those choices almost made me forget what it feels like to be brave. I said, sometimes the bravest and most important thing you can do is just show up. Steve and I made sure that we weren't with her when her heat was called. When it was time for the girls to get on the blocks, I wasn't sure if she'd be there, but she was. We stood at the end of her lane and held her breath. She looked right at us, nodded her head, and snapped her goggles into place. She was the last one out of the pool. The other swimmers had already left the deck, and there were girls standing on the blocks ready for the next heat. Steve and I screamed and cheered the entire time. When she got out of the pool, she walked over to her coach, who gave her a hug, then showed her something about her kick. When she finally made her way to us, she was smiling and a little tearful. She looked at her dad and me and said, that was pretty bad, but I did it. I showed up and I got wet. I was brave. I wrote the following parenting manifesto because I need it. Steve and I need it. Putting down the measuring stick in a culture that uses acquisitions and accomplishments to assess worth is not easy. I use a manifesto as a touchstone, a prayer, and a meditation when I'm wrestling with the vulnerability or when I've got that never enough fear. It reminds me of the finding that changed and probably saved my life. Who we are and how we engage with the world are much stronger predicators of how our children will do than what we know about parenting. The Wholehearted Parenting Manifesto, and we'll conclude this chapter with the manifesto. Above all else, I want you to know that you are loved and lovable. You will learn this from my words and actions. The lessons on love are in how I treat you and how I treat myself. I want you to engage with the world from a place of worthiness. You will learn that you are worthy of love, belonging, and joy every time you see me practice self-compassion and embrace my own imperfections. We will practice courage in our family by showing up, letting ourselves be seen, and honoring vulnerability. We will share our stories of struggle and strength. There will always be room in our home for both. We will teach you compassion by practicing compassion with ourselves first, then with each other. We will set and respect boundaries. We will honor hard work, hope, and perseverance. Rest and play will be family values, as well as family practices. You will learn accountability and respect by watching me make mistakes and make amends, and by watching how I ask for what I need and talk about how I feel. I want you to know joy, so together we will practice gratitude. I want you to feel joy, so together we will learn how to be vulnerable. When uncertainty and scarcity visit, you will be able to draw from the spirit that is a part of our everyday life. Together we will cry and face fear and grief. I will want to take away your pain, but instead I will sit with you and teach you how to feel it. We will laugh and sing and dance and create. We will always have permission to be ourselves with each other. No matter what, you will always belong here. As you begin your wholehearted journey, the greatest gift that I can give to you is to live and love with my whole heart and to dare greatly. I will not teach or love or show you anything perfectly, but I will let you see me, and I will always hold sacred the gift of seeing you, truly, deeply seeing you. And you can download this manifesto from Brene's website, BrenéBrown.com. What a beautiful, beautiful manifesto, beautiful chapter on wholehearted parenting. Let me know your thoughts. I hope you got some value out of this. And go ahead and share it to a parent. Go ahead and share it to a mom, a dad. Yeah, and I hope you got tons of value from it. I know I did. Really, really amazing chapter. And I'm excited to dive into the final thoughts of this book in the next Read With Me session. So stay close, okay? Cheers to you. Cheers to life. Cheers to vulnerability. Cheers to being brave. Cheers to daring greatly. All right? Appreciate you. Love you. We'll see you in the next Read With Me session.